Hello my friends, I have purchased a new toy. Oh, I mean, a very serious and totally professional tool. New camera, Sony A7S3. If you watched my previous videos, you know that I also bought Canon R5 Mark II. Very expensive, $3,200 high-end camera. What happened? Why am I suddenly, after only several months, have another one? On paper, Canon is the master of everything. Best dream hybrid cameras that can do both photo and video very well. 8K 60 RAW, 4K 120 frames per second, 2K 240 FPS, or a shoot time machine that can shoot multiple seconds into the past. I will be quick, it is not a review. I had to sell my Canon. Also, I was able to make the most in-depth test that you can physically find on the internet for a camera. On my new test bench that I built specifically for smartphones and mirrorless photo and cinema cameras. I already made deep dive photography of Vivo X100 Ultra and have R5 Mark II as a rival in that video. It is available for my watchers and seekers Cosmic Squad on Patreon. In the nearest future, there will be lots of videos about cameras, like this Canon review, deep dive in the menu system and feature research. But what about Canon R5 Mark II? Why on earth I had to sell it for a 5-year-old Sony? I will describe it simple. Canon R5 Mark II is just not a good, reliable video camera. Here, I said it. I'm ready for tons of backlash and dislikes. But I do not care, because it is true. I faced tons of limitations, overheating, physical baked-in corruption due to temperatures, enormous, ridiculous file sizes, like no joke. On my test bench, I have image quality tests, noise performance, dynamic range research, autofocus, tracking, stabilization, multiple rolling shutter tests, and so on and so on. Both for photo and video. And my whole recorded files combined weigh more than 5 terabytes, 5000 gigs, that I now have to store permanently on my NAS server. I have zero to none control over bitrate. It is unpractical. It has no visible impact on image quality. That is very poor in some occasions. For example, what is the point of such heavy large file size of 4K 120 frames per second and 4K 60 frames per second if it is a line skip and looks more closer to good 1080p or 1440p instead of real 4K? Has a lot more noise that is hard to fix or cannot be fixed at all. More patterns. I stumbled across some comments online that sounded like this. Why on earth you need 4K 120 frames per second? What are you planning to shoot with 240 frames? 24 FPS is everything that we ever needed, and 60 FPS is more than good enough. It is very hard to speak with people with such mentality. It is hard to try and explain basic things to such people. But, in my case, I shoot my videos in 60 frames per second. So 120 FPS will be only 2 times slow motion. And 240 FPS will be only 4 times slow motion. If a person have zero imagination to understand what can be done and achieved with 120 FPS and 240 FPS, I have nothing to say to such person. It is a reason why we still have no good looking for 80 FPS and above. For me, good looking 4K 60, 4K 120, and preferably 240 FPS and up is a must. And on Canon, it is just not. Again, it is not a review. That will come later. There were a lot more little quirks for video that made it simply unpractical or straight up unusable to use on all my YouTube channels. I have not even touched not only battery life, but extremely slow charging speeds, without easy way to charge it via Type-C or dummy battery. White balance control. Canon still decade later, have not yet fixed how you capture manual white balance on video, with need to switch to photo mode. My blood should be boiled just by speaking about it. But honestly, I feel only apathy. I am tired and have no energy to care anymore. And price is not justified. I was very lucky to buy it for only $3,200. Some people have to spend a lot more in some countries. I love when the purchase gives you a feeling that you got more than you paid for. Obviously, everyone does. But I felt that I wasted money on the photo features that I will simply never use. And video features are unpractical and complicated, poor, line-skipped and noisy. So, this Sony, in theory, should fix everything Canon could not give me. And I bought A7S III for $1,600. It is not new, but barely used, in very good conditions. I lost on Canon resale $300, and it is well worth it in my opinion. Crazy that 5 years later, there is still no camera what truly rivals this device. I am very curious to test it versus Canon and other devices. What is all that talking about low light, about dynamic range? Is it really that good? Because Canon showed poor highlight performance, even versus modern smartphones. Of course, Sony is not perfect in any means. In the past I used A7 III, Sony ZV-10, and tried little bit of A6700. And I immediately have noticed Sony's well-known build quality. Some wobbles on the screen, that is very dim by the way. Squeaking on the SD card door. I cannot say that it is bad. Actually, for some reason it feels more robust and pleasant to touch than Canon's R5, that felt like a plastic toy. But still, I wish it was on par with Nikon and Panasonic. By the way, want to mention screen a little bit more. For some reason, Sony always put very atrocious, bad quality screens on their even expensive models. They are very dim outside and such. But here is an easy solution and workaround. Sony Monitor and Control app for a smartphone. 2 taps on the screen, and I have extra large, bright OLED wireless monitor in my hands, with which I can fully control the camera with almost no latency. And with false colors. And with waveforms. Like, why would I care about anything else when I have such a powerful tool? And you can use any Android or Apple device. You do not need a Sony smartphone for that. By the way, speaking about a Sony smartphone, I have bought a new walkie-talkie, Sony Xperia 5 Mark IV. I paid only $130 for it, in a perfect conditions. In fact, I bought second one for Mrs. Alien for $160, $290 for both phones. Crazy that this $1,000 MSRP so-called flagship device can be found only 3 years later for such a price. It really shows the true value of this modern, overly hyped and overly expensive technology. Not a full review will come later next month. But there is something more deep and unfixable that I want to show. Check this out. I do not know why it is not discussed more. I know only a couple of people on YouTube who mentioned it, and I only found them after I started to search this problem. Sony does not have 25 or 30 FPS on H.265/AVC codec. Like, are you freaking serious? No, really. H.265 is very efficient codec that has extremely nice image quality even on lower bitrates. If Canon situation gave me apathy, here my blood really starts to boil. I even made a very deep and long emotional poem to express my confused and agitated feelings. I want to read it. Sony, Sony, Sony so Sony. Why? No, really, why? In this day and age when we already have AV1, a codec that is even more efficient than HAVC, that NVIDIA RTX cards literally has double encoders for. I already have tested various high-end computers and laptops. There is literally no difference in decoding H.265 versus H.264. And in 2025, on the Sony cameras such as FX3, FX30 and all other, there is still no 25 FPS and 30 FPS on H.265. Crazy! It has only 24, 60 or 120 FPS if you are on NTSC. or just 50 and 100 if you are on PAL, which I am right now, in PAL region. And even if I was on NTSC, I just do not like 24 FPS. It has nothing to do with cinema. 24 choppy frames won't suddenly make your video a movie. Luckily, I have a workaround. I enjoy smooth footage. I choose 30 frames per second over 24 any day of the week. And honestly, I love to shoot 50 and 60 frames per second on a 4K 60 FPS timeline. Yes, I do not like 24 frames. I love the smoothness. There is some BS online that human eye can perceive only 24 FPS. Lmao. So, my workaround is just to shoot everything in 4K 50 and 60 FPS. And if there will ever be a time when I need 30 or 25 FPS, I will just put 4K 60 FPS footage on 30 FPS timeline and call it a day. I just do not understand. People call it a video and cinema cameras, but almost no one speaks about lack of H.265 recording options. It is something that should not exist. There is no possible timeline in this reality where cinema cameras does not have basic functionalities and recording options. But here we are, discussing it. Also, by the way, I found one more enrageous stuff. On Sony you can have 3 custom modes where you can save recording options. They call it memory recall. M1, M2, M3. But for some unknown and odd reason, you cannot access custom white balance settings. Like, at all. No, really. What? Why? If on Canon it is hard and annoying, on Sony I cannot do that at all inside memory recall. I have 2 options. Either say bye-bye to custom white balance and use only auto or manual temperature knob, or not to use memory recall and each and every time deep dive into the menu to change frame rates and resolutions. Pick your poison. Annoying one, or even more annoying two. So stupid. Last big quirk that I faced. To shoot 4K 120 and 2K and 240 FPS in the slow and quick mode, you need V90 card. I had to buy one, and in my opinion, SD card's price is a total scam. Here, I have CF Express Type B card, but in reality it is a metal adapter. Inside there is a small NVMe SSD disk for 2 TB of storage, and I can put it inside Type B slot in such cameras as Canon R5 Mark II, Nikon Z9 and others. $2,000 gigs SSD with this metal Type B adapter cost only $100 for me. And here this V90 SD card for laughable and pathetic 128 gigs costs $80. And it was a steal of a deal. Usually these cards are even more expensive. They are cool and dandy. They have additional second row of metal connectors for faster transfer speed. But 2000 gigs SSD with metal enclosure is almost the same price as 128 gigs V90 SD card that I was very lucky to find for such low price. Of course, low in commas. Crazy world we live in. For people who will say, those who can afford such expensive camera can afford buying a good card. I have something to say, but it won't be in this video. Overall, for my first impressions, I really enjoy this old but still beast of a camera, despite some huge quirks. I have not yet conducted in-depth tests, but it really can see in the darkness. On base ISO has some room to play around with. By the way, people are talking about E-mount lenses and how they are awesome. And yes, it is true. But I plan to use my EF lenses with this 7 Artisans EF2E adapter. Phase detect autofocus on video works very nice. It is sticky and quick, almost like a native mount. I have an L-series lens EF24-70 Mark II that I bought for $800, and my trusty Sigma 35mm 1.4 art lens that I was able to find insanely good deal for only $350. And my favorite, Canon 10-18 STM lens. It is APS-C lens, but from 13 it covers full frame. And with active steady shot on, I can use 12mm on the full frame. It is so wide. And I can turn on Canon lens stabilization on top of IBIS in Sony camera. And it works. Funny stuff that I could not do it on Canon bodies. Canon camera forces me to APS-C mode. They literally do not ask but unapologetically switch cameras into a crop mode, with zero ability to manually choose. Also on Canon, if you turn on lens tape, in-camera IBIS will mostly won't work, if work at all. And turning lens stabilization switch off turns in-camera IBIS off also. So annoying. But on Sony I can do both. Choose full frame versus crop mode and have lens tape on and off separately from the IBIS. Very cool. So, I have better experience with Canon lenses on a Sony body. Sort of. Sonon? Kani? Of course it is not perfect, not silent, but hey. I really love the coatings on that lenses, rendering and 3D pop of micro contrast. I am more than happy and do not have to experience a headache of switching systems. And I am not glued to Sony mount. I am free to try out any camera of any brand. That will happen in the future, by the way. I plan to test new and old Canon cameras, Sony, Nikon, and the cameras that I am most interested in, Panasonic Lumix. I plan to make tons of camera reviews on YouTube and add lots of downloadable photo and video examples for my Alien Vault, for my Patreon squad members. Thank you all for watching and support. I will be glad to see you in the next videos. Have a very extraterrestrial day.